There is something that does not make sense to people who did not live it. Black families in the 1970s were supposed to be broke, supposed to be struggling, supposed to be going without. And yes, times were hard. The economy was brutal, jobs were scarce, and racism made everything twice as difficult. But if you walked into a black home on any given evening during that decade, what you smelled coming from that kitchen would stop you dead in your tracks. Because somehow, some way, there was always food. Hi, my name is James, and this is Soulful Nostalgia, the channel where we go back and recover the wisdom, the traditions, and the unsung genius of the generations that raised us. 1. The deep freezer was a sacred vault. If you grew up black in the 1970s, you already know that the chest freezer was not an appliance. It was an institution. It sat in the basement or on the back porch, humming low and steady, like it was keeping secrets. And in a way, it was. Grandmothers filled that freezer the way generals stock a bunker. Whole chickens bought when the price dropped. Pork chops wrapped tight in white freezer paper with the date written on top in black marker. Corn cut straight from the cob in July, sealed away before winter had a chance to arrive. Children were taught early that you did not open that freezer without a reason. Because every inch of space represented planning, sacrifice, and foresight. That chest freezer was not cold storage. It was a promise that the family was going to eat. 2. Grandma's garden. Fed the whole block. Do not let anyone tell you that community gardens are a new idea. Black grandmothers in the 1970s were running full agricultural operations in their backyards decades before anyone put the word sustainable in front of the word farming. Collard greens grew in long, proud rows. Tomatoes climbed makeshift trellises, built from whatever wood was available. Okra shot up tall in the summer heat like it had somewhere important to be. Butter beans, snap beans, and sweet peppers filled every available inch of ground, because every inch of ground was an opportunity. But here is what made those gardens extraordinary. Grandma was not just growing food for her household. She was growing food for the neighborhood. When Mrs. Johnson down the street was having a hard week, a bag of fresh vegetables appeared on her porch without a single word being exchanged. That garden had no fence around it, because the harvest was never meant for just one family. 3. Canning and preserving was a fall ritual. Come late summer and early fall, something shifted in black households across this country. The kitchen transformed. The stove ran all day. Glass jars lined every available counter surface, and the sound of lids sealing with that satisfying pop filled the house like music. Canning season was serious business. Tomatoes were blanched, peeled, and packed into jars. Green beans snapped by hand and processed in pressure cookers that hissed and rocked with authority. Peaches were preserved in light syrup. Pepper jelly was poured into small jars that would later become Christmas gifts and church sale items. Children sat at the kitchen table with their job to do: snapping beans, peeling tomatoes, washing jars. Nobody was a bystander during canning season. Those shelves of preserved food were the answer to a question nobody wanted to ask out loud. What do we eat when times get hard? Now, this is where I need you to understand something about the black kitchen in the 1970s that most food shows will never teach you. Nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, was thrown away. The bone from Sunday's ham became Tuesday's bean soup. Stale cornbread crumbled into cold buttermilk and became a meal. Vegetable peelings went into a stock pot on the back burner. Bacon grease was poured carefully into a coffee can on the stove, because that grease was going to season the next 3 meals. Black grandmothers believed that waste was a moral failure, that throwing away food while your family had needs was a sin against every hour worked to earn it. And honestly, the food that came out of that philosophy tasted better than anything you could order in a restaurant today, because necessity and creativity cooked together produce something extraordinary. 5. The whole pig was used, every single part. Let me tell you something that took me a while to fully appreciate. The cuts of meat that fine dining restaurants charge premium prices for today were the cuts that black families in the 1970s ate out of necessity and genius. Oxtail, pig feet, neck bones, chitlins, fatback. Every single part of that animal was used because every single part had value to a family that understood resourcefulness. This was not about settling for less. This was about a generation of cooks who possessed the skill to transform what others considered scraps into meals of extraordinary depth and flavor. A pot of neck bones simmered low with onions and seasoning all day long produced a broth so rich it made you close your eyes when you tasted it. The nose-to-tail cooking movement that chefs celebrate today, black grandmothers were doing that in the 1970s. They just called it Tuesday dinner. 6. Dried beans and rice were always in the cabinet. Go back in your memory to any black household in the 1970s. Look in that pantry. I guarantee you what you find. A large bag of dried pinto beans or black-eyed peas. A bag of long-grain white rice, without exception. These two ingredients together were a complete meal, a complete protein, and a complete financial strategy all at once. A 5-pound bag of dried beans cost almost nothing and could feed a family of 6 for an entire week. Red beans and rice, white beans with ham hocks, black-eyed peas with fatback and onion. The variations were endless, and every single one settled something deep in your soul. Those two ingredients were the floor beneath the floor, the last line of defense that meant no one went to bed hungry, no matter what else was happening. 7. The corner store tab system. Now, here is something the younger generation does not know existed. And honestly, when I explain it, some of you are going to wonder why we ever let it disappear. In black neighborhoods in the 1970s, the corner store owner knew your family. Not just your name, your family. He knew how many children you had. He knew when payday was, and when times got tight between paychecks, he ran a tab. You walked in, got what your family needed, and it went on the book. A handwritten ledger behind the counter with your family's name on it. No interest, no credit check, no application, just trust, built through years of community relationship. Mothers sent children to the store with one instruction. Tell Mr. Henderson to put it on the tab. That tab system fed families during hard weeks in a way that no government program could replicate, because it was built on knowing your neighbor. 8. Church kitchens fed the community. I have said it before on this channel, and I will say it again. The black church in the 1970s was not just a spiritual institution. It was a food distribution system with a choir. Church kitchens operated with military efficiency under women who could cook for 300 people the way most of us cook for 4. Wednesday night prayer meeting came with a meal. Sunday service ended with a spread. And when a family was going through hard times, deacons showed up at their door with boxes of food, no paperwork required. Nobody announced from the pulpit that the Williams family was struggling. That was not how it worked. Food simply appeared. A covered dish on the porch, a box of groceries in the trunk of a car, a hot meal carried across the street by a woman who said she had cooked too much. The church kitchen was grace-made edible. 9. Neighbors shared without being asked. This is the one that gets me every single time. What I'm about to describe has almost completely vanished from modern life, and I think we are lesser for losing it. In black neighborhoods in the 1970s, when a woman cooked a big pot of something, she automatically calculated extra, not because she had been asked, but because cooking for the community was simply part of cooking. It was built into the recipe. A pot of vegetable soup somehow had enough for the elderly woman next door. The extra pan of cornbread made it down the street to the family whose mother was sick. This was not charity. I want to be careful because The distinction matters. It was not charity. It was community. Charity implies distance between the giver and the receiver. What happened in those neighborhoods acknowledged that your neighbor's hunger was your hunger too. I need you to stop and give proper respect to something before we go any further. The skill, the absolute culinary genius that lived in the hands of Black women in the 1970s. These were women who could walk into a nearly empty kitchen and produce a meal that made grown people emotional. 3 potatoes, half an onion, some flour, and a little fatback could become a dinner that fed everyone at the table and had people asking for seconds. It was not magic, though it looked like magic. It was mastery developed over decades of necessity, the ability to stretch ingredients, to layer flavor from simple components, to know exactly how long something needed to cook without a single timer or thermometer, was an inheritance more valuable than money. Some of the greatest culinary minds who ever lived never had a cooking show. They just fed their families every single day, with wisdom in their hands and love in every pot. 11. Fishing and hunting. Put protein on the table. Now, I know some of you who grew up in cities are going to raise an eyebrow at this one. Stay with me. Even in urban areas, the tradition of catching your own food was alive and functioning in the 1970s. Fathers and grandfathers took children fishing at local rivers, ponds, and creeks, not as a recreational activity, but as a genuine contribution to the household food supply. Catfish, perch, and bass went straight from the water to the kitchen. Grandmothers fried that fish in seasoned cornmeal in cast iron skillets, and nobody at that table thought about the price of protein. In more rural areas, hunting was equally practical. Squirrel, rabbit, and deer filled freezers in ways that grocery store budgets simply could not. Children who learned to fish young understood something important. The world around them contained food if they had the knowledge and patience to find it. That understanding was a form of security that could never be taken away. 12. The swap economy among women. Before there were farmers markets and food co-ops, Black women in the 1970s ran a fully functional food exchange economy right on their own streets. A woman with a large garden, but no chickens traded fresh vegetables with a neighbor who had more eggs than she could use. Someone with extra jars of preserves traded them for butter or flour. A grandmother with smoked sausage from a relative's hog killing shared it in exchange for canned tomatoes. This was not informal. It was systematic. Women kept track in their heads of who had what was needed, and what the fair exchange looked like. I want someone to tell me that is not sophisticated economics, because that is exactly what it was. A community-based food economy built on trust and the understanding that everyone's surplus belonged to everyone's need. 13. Buying in bulk before it was trendy. Listen, I have to laugh when I hear people talking about buying in bulk like it is some revolutionary discovery of the modern age. Black mothers in the 1970s were buying in bulk before the word bulk became a marketing term. They knew which wholesalers would sell to individuals. They pooled money with sisters and cousins to buy 50-pound bags of flour and sugar and split them evenly. They bought flats of canned goods when the price dropped and stacked them in closets, under beds, and in any available storage space. The psychology was simple and brilliant. You buy when the buying is good, because the buying will not always be good. Modern families with Costco memberships and Sam's Club cards are practicing the same wisdom those women had figured out generations before. They just have a parking lot now. 14. Making cheap cuts of meat into something extraordinary. There is a transformation that happens in a slow cooking pot that no amount of money can rush, and no expensive cut of meat can replicate. Black grandmothers in the 1970s understood this at the cellular level. Oxtail placed in a pot with onion, garlic, and seasoning, and left to cook for 4 hours, becomes something that fine dining establishments now charge $40 a plate to serve. Neck bones simmered with tomatoes and thyme for an entire afternoon, producing a gravy so deep it seems impossible it started with the least expensive cut at the butcher counter. The secret was always time and patience, and the absolute refusal to believe that inexpensive meant inferior. They cooked with confidence and intention, and what came out of those pots produced memories that grandchildren carry with them for the rest of their lives. 15. The sweet potato and greens combination that stretched everything. If I had to name the two vegetables that quietly saved the most lives in Black households during the 1970s, it would be the sweet potato and the collard green. And it would not even be a close competition. Sweet potatoes were filling in a way that satisfied hunger at the deepest level. Roasted, boiled, mashed, or baked into a pie, they kept children full and working people energized through long days. Collard greens cooked low and slow with a smoked neck bone produced a pot liquor so nutritious that mothers made children drink it from a cup before the meal even started. Cornbread dunked in pot liquor was not a side dish. It was a complete meal that cost almost nothing. These were not humble foods. They were strategic foods, chosen and prepared with intention by women who understood nutrition intuitively, long before a government food pyramid tried to explain it. 16. Bread was always being made at home. Here is something I want the younger generation to sit with for a moment. In the 1970s, Black households baked bread, not as a weekend project or a quarantine hobby, as a regular, unremarkable, expected part of keeping the family fed. Cornbread was the daily staple, mixed in a bowl, poured into a hot cast iron skillet greased with bacon fat, and slid into the oven until golden. It took 20 minutes and cost almost nothing. A bowl of beans without cornbread was a snack. A bowl of beans with cornbread was a dinner. Biscuits were made from scratch on weekend mornings because a good biscuit with butter and cane syrup was breakfast, lunch, and sufficient comfort for whatever the day intended to bring. Hot water bread required nothing more than cornmeal, boiling water, and a hot skillet. Bread meant fullness, and fullness meant the family was going to be all right. 17. Wild plants and greens were harvested from nature. Now I know some of you are going to think I have gone a little too far back into history. But I promise you this was real, and this was recent. In the 1970s, there were still grandmothers who knew exactly which plants growing wild along fence lines and creek banks were edible, and they harvested them without a second thought. Dandelion greens were collected in early spring and tossed with hot bacon dressing into salads that tasted sharper than anything from a grocery store. Lamb's quarter was gathered and cooked just like spinach. Wild berries were picked by children who knew which ones were safe because they had been taught. This knowledge came directly from ancestors who had survived on what the land offered. By the 1970s, it was supplemental, but families who carried that knowledge were quietly more food secure than anyone looking at their bank account would have predicted. 18. Potluck culture meant nobody ate alone. The Black potluck in the 1970s was an act of collective survival, dressed up as a celebration. I mean that in the most profound way possible. When families gathered, whether for a church event, a reunion, or simply a Sunday afternoon that turned into an occasion, everyone brought something. The rule, unspoken but absolute, was that you brought enough to share with everyone present, plus a few people who were not expected. The woman stretching her budget that month still brought her macaroni and cheese. The family who had done well that week brought the ribs. Someone brought potato salad. Someone brought cake. Someone brought a giant pot of something nobody asked for, but everyone was grateful for it. By the end of the table, there was always more food than people. Always. The leftovers went home with whoever needed them most, without anyone making a ceremony of the giving. The potluck was mutual aid with a paper plate. 19. Stretching meat with vegetables and legumes. This is a concept that gets lost in the modern conversation about food. The idea is simple. Meat as seasoning, not the main event. Not the centerpiece. The seasoning. In Black households in the 1970s, a single smoked turkey leg, a ham hock, or 3 strips of fatback could flavor an entire pot of beans that fed 8 people. The meat was not there to be the meal. It was there to give everything else depth and the kind of savory richness that made every spoonful satisfying. This was wisdom. This was sustainability, before sustainability became a word people put on tote bags. Butter beans with smoked turkey, black-eyed peas with ham hock, cabbage cooked with fatback. These are not poverty foods. These are masterworks of a culinary tradition that deserves every bit of reverence we can give it. 20. Knowing which days grocery stores marked down. Meat, I want you to imagine having a mental database of every grocery store within reasonable distance of your home, including the specific days each store discounted its meat. Because Black mothers, in the 1970s, had exactly that database, stored right in their heads. They knew the Piggly Wiggly marked down chicken on Wednesday afternoons. They knew the independent grocery on 5th Street reduced pork prices on Friday mornings. They planned shopping trips around these schedules, the way a stockbroker plans trades around market movements. And when they arrived at that markdown counter, they bought not just what they needed this week, what they could freeze, share, and store. That knowledge, passed from mother to daughter, was food security in the form of information. And information, as those women understood perfectly, was never something to take for granted. 21. Teaching children to eat what was cooked. No complaints. I am going to say something that some modern parents may find controversial, and I am saying it with love. Black children in the 1970s did not get a separate menu. You sat down. You ate what was on the table. You said, "Thank you." And if the thought of complaint crossed your mind, you looked at your mother's face, and the thought kept moving right on through without stopping. This was not harshness. This was an education in gratitude that only people who have genuinely experienced food scarcity can fully appreciate. Mothers who had lived through times when there was not enough did not raise children who turned up their noses at a hot meal. Those children grew up to eat widely, appreciate simple food, and find genuine pleasure in meals that cost little to produce. They never became the adults who wasted food because they had been taught from the very beginning that waste was not an option. 22. The importance of lard and fat as flavor and fuel. The rehabilitation of lard has been happening slowly in food circles for the last decade. Chefs talk about it like they discovered something new. I need to inform those chefs that Black grandmothers never stopped using it. There was no abandonment to recover from. Lard and bacon grease served 2 essential purposes in the 1970s Black kitchen. First, flavor. There is a depth and richness that animal fat brings to cooking that no vegetable oil can replicate. Cornbread made with lard has a texture that cornbread made with anything else simply does not possess. Second, fat is caloric fuel. For families where physical labor was the reality of daily life, the caloric density of food cooked in fat kept bodies working and children going. Grandmothers who cooked with lard were not ignoring health. They were practicing a different and very practical definition of it. 23. Sunday dinner was prepared to last all week. Sunday dinner in a Black household in the 1970s was an event, but it was also a strategy. The roasted chicken was large enough to become tomorrow's sandwiches and Wednesday's soup and Friday's rice and gravy if the week required it. The pot of beans made Sunday was Monday's lunch and Tuesday's dinner when seasoned differently and served over fresh cornbread. Grandmothers cooked big on Sunday not because they did not understand portion control. They cooked big because they understood the week. They knew Tuesday evening nobody would have time to cook from scratch. They knew Thursday the paycheck had not arrived yet. This was meal planning before meal planning had a name or an Instagram aesthetic. It meant that every single night of the week, when children came to the table, there was something warm and good waiting for them. 24. The knowledge passed down at the stove. There is a kind of education that no school provides and no book contains. In Black households in the 1970s, that learning happened at the stove. Children learned to cook by standing beside the women who were cooking, not watching from a distance. They stood close, stirred when told to stir, tasted when told to taste. They learned to season by instinct, by smell, and by knowledge accumulated over years of doing the same thing until the doing became second nature. A grandmother did not sit down and say, "Today I am going to teach you to make red beans." She simply started making red beans and expected you to pay attention. The children who learned at those stoves carried that knowledge when they moved out, started families, and faced their own hard teams. That kitchen education was food security that traveled with them for the rest of their lives. 25. The mindset that hunger was never an option. I have saved this one for last because it is the most important. More important than the deep freezer. More important than the garden. More important than any technique or tradition or system I have described in this video. The reason Black families always had food during hard times in the 1970s was ultimately not about resources. It was about mindset. These were women and men who had descended from people who had survived the unsurvivable, who had come through systems designed to break them and arrived on the other side, still standing, still feeding their children, still gathering at tables together. They carried in their bones a refusal to be defeated by scarcity, a refusal to accept that their children would go without, a refusal to sit down in the face of difficulty without first having done absolutely everything within their power to provide. When a grandmother looked at a nearly empty kitchen and started cooking anyway, it was not desperation, it was a declaration, a statement made without words that said, "This family will eat tonight, and tomorrow night, and the night after that. Because I am here, and I know what to do, and I will not stop until they are fed." That mindset was the greatest inheritance of all, greater than money, greater than property, greater than anything that could be stored in a chest freezer or sealed in a glass jar. It was the knowledge that you came from people who always found a way, and therefore so would you. And that is why the table was never empty. Not because times were not hard. They were hard. Not because there was always plenty. There was not. But because the people who sat at the head of those tables refused to let hard times be the final word on what their families deserved. My name is James. This is Soulful Nostalgia. If this video meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me which one of these traditions lived in your household. Share this with somebody who needs to remember where they came from. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you have not already. I will see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves. Go call your grandmama if she is still here, because she fed you more ways than you know.